The great hall of the royal palace buzzed with whispered conversations as nobles filled every seat. Today was different from any other court session in the kingdom's history. Princess Elena stood in the center of the marble floor, her hands bound with golden chains that seemed to mock her royal status. The charges against her were serious: treason, conspiracy against the crown, and betraying state secrets to enemy kingdoms. Captain Marcus Thorne stood at his post near the throne, watching the proceedings with growing unease. He had served as the princess's personal guard for 5 years, and every instinct in his body told him something was terribly wrong. The evidence presented seemed too perfect, too convenient. Documents appeared overnight, witnesses came forward with rehearsed testimonies, and suddenly the kingdom's most beloved princess was branded a traitor. The chief prosecutor, Lord Aldrich, paced before the court with theatrical confidence. His voice echoed through the hall as he presented each piece of evidence. Letters allegedly written in Elena's handwriting detailed plans to overthrow her father, King Roderick. Gold coins bearing foreign seals were supposedly found hidden in her chambers. 3 servants testified they had seen her meeting with mysterious strangers in the castle gardens under moonlight. Marcus noticed how Lord Aldrich's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. The man had always coveted power, always whispered poison in the king's ear during council meetings. Now he stood before the court, painting the princess as a dangerous enemy of the realm. The king sat silent on his throne, his face a mask of pain and confusion. The man who had once doted on his daughter now looked at her with hurt and betrayal. Princess Elena maintained her dignity despite the humiliating accusations. Her chin remained high, her voice steady when she spoke her denial. She explained that the handwriting could be forged, that anyone could plant evidence in her rooms, that the servants might be lying for coin or under threat. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The nobles murmured among themselves, some nodding as if they had expected this day to come. Marcus remembered the real Princess Elena, the woman who secretly donated her jewels to help poor families, who spent hours reading to sick children in the castle's infirmary, who once risked her own life to save a servant's child from a burning stable. This woman standing accused was the same person who had countless times shown mercy when others demanded justice, who had fought for peace when the kingdom's advisors pushed for war. The trial continued for hours. More witnesses appeared, each adding another layer to the growing mountain of evidence against Elena. A merchant claimed she had approached him to sell royal artifacts for foreign gold. A stable boy said he had seen her burning papers in the middle of the night. A kitchen maid testified that the princess had asked strange questions about the castle's security and guard rotations. As the afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the courtroom floor, Marcus felt his anger building. He watched Elena's shoulders begin to sag under the weight of the accusations. Her loyal lady-in-waiting, Sarah, sat in the gallery with tears streaming down her face. Even some of the guards Marcus had served alongside for years began to look at their former charge with suspicion and disgust. Lord Aldrich seemed to sense victory approaching. His final speech painted Elena as a masterful deceiver who had fooled everyone, including her own father, for years. He spoke of the danger she posed to the kingdom, the betrayal of trust, the necessity of harsh punishment to send a message to other potential traitors. The crowd listened intently, many nodding in agreement as his words washed over them like a dark tide. The king finally spoke, his voice heavy with sorrow. He announced that the court would recess to consider the evidence and testimony. Elena was to be taken to the castle dungeons to await judgment. As the guards moved forward to escort her away, Marcus saw something in her eyes that confirmed his worst fears. Not guilt or defeat, but the quiet desperation of someone who knew they were being destroyed by lies. The great hall began to empty as nobles filed out, discussing the shocking revelations in hushed tones. Some expressed surprise at the princess's alleged crimes, while others claimed they had always suspected something was wrong. The king remained on his throne, staring at the spot where his daughter had stood, his face showing the pain of a father whose world had been shattered. Marcus watched as Elena was led away, her golden chains catching the fading sunlight. In that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. He could no longer stand by and watch an innocent woman be destroyed by what he increasingly believed was an elaborate conspiracy. The captain of the royal guard had sworn an oath to protect the royal family, and that included protecting them from false accusations and political manipulation. As the last of the courtiers left the great hall, Marcus remained at his post, his mind racing with plans. He knew that speaking out against the evidence would be dangerous, that questioning the testimony could cost him his position or even his life. But he also knew that remaining silent would mean watching justice die alongside the princess he had sworn to protect. The real battle for Elena's life was about to begin, and Marcus Thorne was preparing to fight it, even if he had to stand alone against the entire kingdom. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He paced his small quarters near the guard tower, reviewing every detail of the trial in his mind. Something about the evidence bothered him deeply, beyond just his loyalty to Princess Elena. The timing was too perfect, the witnesses too coordinated, and Lord Aldrich's confidence seemed built on more than just the strength of his case. Marcus decided to conduct his own investigation. He began by visiting the castle archives, searching through old records and correspondence. Using his position as captain of the guard, he gained access to areas most people couldn't reach. What he found in those dusty files made his blood run cold. Several of the witnesses against Elena had received large sums of money in recent weeks, documented in the castle's financial records as payments for special services. The next morning brought more disturbing discoveries. Marcus spoke privately with some of the castle staff who hadn't testified. A young scullery maid nervously told him she had seen Lord Aldrich meeting with the merchant who claimed Elena had tried to sell royal artifacts. They had met 3 times in a private chamber, and each time the merchant left with a heavy purse. Another servant mentioned seeing strangers in the castle weeks before the trial, men who claimed to be there on Lord Aldrich's business. Marcus realized the conspiracy ran deeper than he had imagined. He began following Lord Aldrich discreetly, noting his meetings and conversations. The Lord was careful, but not careful enough. Marcus discovered that several of the key witnesses were people who owed Lord Aldrich money or favors. The stable boy who testified against Elena was Lord Aldrich's nephew, desperate to pay off gambling debts. The kitchen maid who spoke of suspicious questions was facing eviction from her family home, unless she could pay back rent. Meanwhile, Princess Elena remained in the dungeons, awaiting the king's final judgment. Marcus visited her once using his authority as captain to check on the security arrangements. She looked pale but determined, her spirit not yet broken despite the terrible circumstances. She thanked him for his years of faithful service and told him not to risk his position by supporting her lost cause. But Marcus had no intention of abandoning his investigation. He discovered that the letters supposedly written in Elena's handwriting had been penned by a skilled forger Lord Aldrich had hired months earlier. The foreign coins found in her chambers had been planted by guards loyal to Lord Aldrich, men who believed they were helping to catch a real traitor. Even the mysterious strangers Elena was accused of meeting were actors paid to be seen in the castle gardens, knowing that servants would report their presence. The most shocking discovery came when Marcus found Lord Aldrich's private correspondence hidden in a secret compartment of his desk. The letters revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Lord Aldrich had been working with Prince Damien, the king's ambitious nephew, to remove Elena from the line of succession. Damien, who lived in exile after a previous failed attempt to seize power, had promised Lord Aldrich vast rewards once he became king. The plan was brilliant in its cruelty. Rather than attempt another military coup, they decided to destroy Elena's reputation so completely that the king would have no choice but to name Damien as his heir. Elena's popularity with the people made her dangerous to their ambitions, so they crafted charges that would turn that popularity into disgust and hatred. They had spent months preparing false evidence, bribing witnesses, and positioning themselves for the perfect moment to strike. Marcus felt sick as he read letter after letter, detailing how they had manipulated events. They had even arranged for Elena to be in certain places at specific times, ensuring that servants would see her behaving in ways that could later be twisted into evidence of guilt. The princess had been unknowingly dancing to their tune for months, every innocent action carefully recorded and later presented as proof of treason. The weight of his discoveries pressed down on Marcus like a stone. He knew he had uncovered the truth, but proving it would be nearly impossible. Lord Aldrich and Prince Damien had been careful to cover their tracks, and most of the witnesses were too frightened or too well paid to change their testimony. The king, devastated by what he believed was his daughter's betrayal, might not be willing to hear evidence that contradicted the narrative he had already accepted. Marcus spent the next 2 days carefully copying the incriminating letters and gathering every piece of evidence he could find. He knew that confronting Lord Aldrich directly would be dangerous, but he also knew that time was running out. The king was expected to announce Elena's sentence within days, and once judgment was passed, it would be difficult to reverse. As he worked through another sleepless night, Marcus thought about his oath as captain of the royal guard. He had sworn to protect the royal family from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Lord Aldrich and Prince Damien represented the worst kind of domestic enemy, those who would destroy the kingdom from within for personal gain. Elena might be facing charges of treason, but the real traitors were the ones who had orchestrated her downfall. The captain made his decision. He would present his evidence to the king directly, despite the risks. If Lord Aldrich had truly convinced the monarch that his daughter was a traitor, then Marcus would have to be prepared to face accusations of conspiracy himself. But he couldn't stand by and watch an innocent woman die for crimes she didn't commit while the real villains prepared to claim their rewards. Marcus gathered his evidence and prepared for the most important confrontation of his life. He knew that tomorrow would determine not only Princess Elena's fate, but the future of the entire kingdom. The real battle was about to begin, and this time the captain of the royal guard would not remain silent on the sidelines. He would fight for truth, for justice, and for the woman he had sworn to protect, no matter the cost to himself. The morning of the sentencing arrived with dark clouds gathering over the castle. King Roderick had called for a final court session, where he would announce Princess Elena's punishment. The great hall filled once again with nobles, officials, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the conclusion of the kingdom's most shocking trial. Marcus stood in his usual position, but today he carried a leather satchel containing all the evidence he had gathered. His heart pounded as he watched Elena being brought in, still wearing the golden chains that marked her as a prisoner. She looked tired but maintained the dignity that had always been her trademark. The king sat heavily on his throne, looking like a man who had aged years in just a few days. Lord Aldrich entered with obvious satisfaction, believing his victory was complete. He had spent the morning meeting with various nobles, no doubt preparing them for the transition of power that would follow Elena's disgrace. Prince Damien had even arrived at the castle the previous night, claiming he had come to support his uncle during this difficult time. In reality, Marcus knew he was there to claim his reward. The king began the proceedings with a heavy voice. He spoke of the pain a father feels when forced to judge his own child, of the duty that required him to put the kingdom's safety above personal feelings. The nobles listened solemnly as he reviewed the evidence presented during the trial. Each accusation seemed to cut deeper into Elena's chances of survival. As the king moved toward announcing the sentence, Marcus made his decision. He stepped forward from his position, his boots echoing in the suddenly quiet hall. Every eye turned toward him as he approached the throne, his hand on the satchel containing the truth that could save Elena's life. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the great hall. "Before you pass judgment, I request permission to present new evidence to the court." The king looked surprised, while Lord Aldrich's face immediately darkened with suspicion. Murmurs ran through the assembled crowd as they wondered what the captain of the guard could possibly have to add to a case that seemed so thoroughly decided. Elena looked up at Marcus with confusion and hope flickering in her eyes. "Captain Thorne," the king said slowly, "what evidence could you possibly have that wasn't presented during the trial?" Marcus opened his satchel and pulled out the copied letters he had found in Lord Aldrich's chambers. "Your Majesty, I have discovered correspondence that proves Princess Elena is innocent of all charges. The evidence against her was manufactured as part of a conspiracy to remove her from the succession and place Prince Damien on the throne." The hall erupted in shocked gasps and angry voices. Lord Aldrich jumped to his feet, his face red with rage. "This is preposterous. The captain is obviously in league with the traitor princess. He should be arrested immediately." But Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I have proof that witnesses were bribed, evidence was planted, and letters were forged. Lord Aldrich has been working with Prince Damien to destroy Princess Elena's reputation and clear the path for a new succession." The king held up his hand for silence, though his expression showed he was struggling to process this unexpected turn of events. "These are serious accusations, Captain. You understand that making false claims in this court could cost you your life? I understand completely, Your Majesty, Marcus replied. But I swore an oath to protect the royal family from all enemies. I cannot stand silent while an innocent princess is condemned, and the real traitors prepare to claim their rewards. Prince Damien, who had been sitting quietly in the gallery, now stood with obvious alarm. Uncle, surely you won't listen to these desperate lies. The captain is clearly trying to save his position by supporting the traitor he failed to detect. Marcus turned to face Prince Damien directly. If I'm lying, Your Highness, then you shouldn't be afraid to hear the evidence. He held up one of the letters. This correspondence, written in your own hand, details the plan to frame Princess Elena. You promise Lord Aldrich the position of chief advisor once you become king, in exchange for his help in removing Elena from succession. The color drained from Prince Damien's face as Marcus began reading excerpts from the letters. The hall listened in stunned silence as details of the conspiracy unfolded. The plan to hire forgers, bribe witnesses, plant evidence, and manipulate events to make Elena appear guilty was laid bare for all to hear. Lord Aldrich realized his carefully constructed house of lies was crumbling. He made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Your Majesty, anyone could forge letters and claim they came from my chambers. The captain has had days to create false evidence to support his wild theories. But Marcus was prepared for this objection. He produced the original letters, still bearing Lord Aldrich's personal seal and written in ink that matched other documents from his office. More importantly, he began calling forward some of the same servants who had provided testimony against Elena. This time, however, several of them were ready to tell the truth. The young scullery maid stepped forward nervously. Your Majesty, I was threatened by Lord Aldrich. He said my family would lose our home if I didn't say I saw the princess burning papers. I never saw any such thing. One by one, other servants came forward to recant their testimony, admitting they had been bribed or threatened into lying. The merchant who claimed Elena had tried to sell royal artifacts broke down completely. Through tears, he confessed that Lord Aldrich had paid him handsomely to make the false accusation. The stable boy, Lord Aldrich's own nephew, admitted his uncle had promised to pay his gambling debts in exchange for his testimony. As the truth poured out, the great hall became chaotic with angry voices and shocked exclamations. Some nobles who had been quick to condemn Elena now looked ashamed of their haste to believe the worst. Others directed their fury at Lord Aldrich and Prince Damien, realizing they had been manipulated into supporting a conspiracy against the crown. King Roderick sat in stunned silence as the evidence mounted. The man who had been ready to condemn his daughter was now faced with the horrible reality that he had been deceived by those he trusted. The pain in his eyes was visible to everyone in the hall as he began to understand the depth of the betrayal. Princess Elena, still chained but no longer facing certain doom, looked at Marcus with tears of gratitude. The captain, who had served her faithfully for 5 years, had risked everything to save her life and restore her honor. The golden chains that had seemed to mock her royal status now seemed like temporary restraints that would soon be removed. The tide had turned completely. What had begun as Elena's sentencing had become the exposure of a conspiracy that reached to the very heart of the kingdom's power structure. King Roderick rose from his throne, his face showing a mixture of rage and heartbreak. The evidence Marcus had presented was overwhelming, and the confessions from the witnesses left no doubt about the conspiracy. The king's voice trembled with emotion as he addressed the court. "Remove the chains from my daughter immediately," the king commanded. 2 guards rushed forward to unlock Elena's golden bonds, their hands shaking as they realized they had been part of keeping an innocent woman prisoner. As the chains fell away, Elena rubbed her wrists but maintained her composure, though tears of relief finally began to flow down her cheeks. Lord Aldrich made a final desperate attempt to escape justice. He tried to push through the crowd toward the exit, but Marcus anticipated his move. The captain blocked his path and several loyal guards surrounded the treacherous lord. "You're not leaving this hall until His Majesty decides your fate," Marcus said firmly. Prince Damien, realizing his plot had completely unraveled, tried a different approach. He fell to his knees before the king, claiming he had been manipulated by Lord Aldrich and never intended for things to go so far. "Uncle, I was deceived just as you were. Lord Aldrich convinced me that Elena was truly a traitor. I only wanted to protect the kingdom." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The letters Marcus had found were written in Damien's own handwriting, clearly showing he was not only aware of the conspiracy, but had helped plan it from the beginning. The king looked down at his nephew with disgust, seeing through the lies to the ambitious schemer beneath. The hall erupted again as nobles began to understand the full scope of what had happened. Many realized they had been manipulated into supporting a false case against their beloved princess. Some had even spoken out publicly against Elena, believing the evidence was genuine. Now they faced the embarrassing reality that they had been fooled by skilled conspirators. Elena, finally free from her chains, walked slowly toward her father. The king descended from his throne to meet her, and for a moment the great hall fell completely silent. Father and daughter stood facing each other, both carrying the wounds of the past few days. Then the king pulled Elena into his arms, holding her tightly as years of pain and regret poured out. "My daughter, my precious daughter," the king whispered, his voice breaking. "Can you ever forgive a foolish old man who doubted you? I should have known in my heart that you could never betray the kingdom we both love." Elena embraced her father, understanding that he too had been a victim of the conspiracy. "Father, they were very clever. The evidence they created was convincing, and they knew exactly how to manipulate the situation. What matters now is that the truth has come to light." Marcus watched this reunion with satisfaction, but he knew the work wasn't finished. Lord Aldrich and Prince Damien needed to face justice for their crimes, and the kingdom needed to understand exactly what had happened. The captain stepped forward and addressed the king. "Your Majesty, we have the main conspirators, but we should investigate further to identify all their accomplices. This plot required many people working together, and some may still be hidden among your court." The king nodded, wiping tears from his eyes as he released Elena. He turned to face Lord Aldrich with a fury that made the treacherous lord shrink back in fear. "Aldrich, you have betrayed not only me personally, but the entire kingdom. Your lies could have led to the execution of an innocent woman, and the eventual destruction of our realm under Damien's rule." Lord Aldrich tried one last, desperate lie. "Your Majesty, I can explain everything. I was trying to protect you from what I truly believed was a threat. Every action I took was motivated by loyalty to the crown." "Loyalty?" the king roared, his voice echoing through the hall. "You call it loyalty to forge letters, bribe witnesses, and plant evidence? You call it loyalty to conspire with my exiled nephew to destroy my daughter's life? Your actions show the worst kind of treason, betrayal from within by someone I trusted completely." Elena, standing beside her father, spoke for the first time since being freed. Her voice was steady and clear, carrying the authority of someone who had faced death and emerged stronger. "Lord Aldrich, you not only tried to destroy me, but you were willing to let the kingdom fall into chaos and civil war. Your conspiracy could have torn our realm apart and caused countless innocent deaths." The princess then turned to address the entire court. "My lords and ladies, we have all learned a valuable lesson about the danger of accepting accusations without careful investigation. Truth and justice require courage and diligence, not just the willingness to believe what seems convenient or obvious." Marcus felt proud as he listened to Elena's words. Despite everything she had endured, she was using this moment to teach rather than seek revenge. This was the true character of the woman he had served and protected, the reason he had risked everything to save her. The king began issuing orders for the immediate arrest of Lord Aldrich and Prince Damien. He commanded a full investigation into all aspects of the conspiracy, with Marcus leading the effort to identify any remaining accomplices. Several nobles who had been quick to support the false charges now volunteered to help with the investigation, hoping to make amends for their hasty judgment. As guards led Lord Aldrich and Prince Damien away, both men looked defeated and desperate. Their carefully planned conspiracy had been completely exposed, and they now faced the same charges of treason they had tried to pin on Elena. The justice they had perverted was now coming for them. The crowd in the great hall began to cheer as they realized what had happened. Princess Elena, their beloved royal who had always shown them kindness and compassion, had been saved from a terrible fate. Captain Marcus, the loyal guard who had risked everything to defend the truth, was being hailed as a hero. The kingdom had been saved from falling into the hands of conspirators who would have destroyed it from within. But even in this moment of triumph, Elena and Marcus both knew that the real work of healing and rebuilding trust was just beginning. In the days following the dramatic revelation, the kingdom buzzed with activity as the full investigation unfolded. Marcus worked tirelessly, following every lead and examining every piece of evidence. What they discovered was even more disturbing than the original conspiracy. Lord Aldrich and Prince Damien had been planning Elena's downfall for over 2 years. The investigation revealed that the conspiracy had tentacles reaching throughout the kingdom. Several minor nobles had been promised positions and wealth in exchange for their support. A network of spies and informants had been reporting on Elena's daily activities, looking for anything that could be twisted into evidence of wrongdoing. Even some of Elena's own servants had been secretly working against her, though most were motivated by fear rather than greed. Marcus found evidence that showed just how close the conspiracy had come to succeeding. Plans had already been drawn up for Elena's execution, to be carried out swiftly before any investigation could uncover the truth. Prince Damien had prepared a speech explaining why he was the kingdom's only hope for stability after the princess's betrayal. Lord Aldrich had arranged for key military commanders to be replaced with men loyal to the new regime. Elena threw herself into helping with the investigation, determined to understand how she had been so completely deceived by people she trusted. She discovered that several of her charitable activities had been secretly monitored and reported as suspicious meetings. Her kindness to foreign visitors had been twisted into evidence of treasonous communication. Even her private conversations with her lady-in-waiting had been overheard and misrepresented. The princess was particularly hurt to learn that Sarah, her trusted lady-in-waiting, had been threatened by the conspirators. They had told Sarah that Elena was truly guilty, and that helping to gather evidence would save the princess from a worse fate. The poor woman had provided innocent details about Elena's daily routine, never realizing how that information would be used against her mistress. King Roderick struggled with his own guilt and shame. He had been so easily manipulated by Lord Aldrich's lies that he had nearly condemned his innocent daughter to death. The king spent hours in private conversation with Elena, begging for her forgiveness and trying to rebuild the trust he had damaged. Elena, with her characteristic compassion, forgave her father completely, understanding that he too had been a victim. The trials of Lord Aldrich and Prince Damien became the most talked-about events in the kingdom's history. Both men tried different strategies to save themselves. Lord Aldrich claimed he had been blackmailed by Prince Damien and forced to participate against his will. He produced forged documents trying to support this claim, but Marcus quickly proved they were fake. Prince Damien attempted to portray himself as a patriot who had been misled by false information about Elena's activities. He claimed he genuinely believed she was a traitor, and that everything he did was motivated by love of country. However, the letters in his own handwriting clearly showed his awareness that Elena was innocent and that the evidence was being manufactured. The most shocking revelation came when investigators discovered that the conspiracy had foreign backing. Prince Damien had been receiving gold from a neighboring kingdom that wanted to destabilize the realm. The enemy nation had hoped that a civil war over succession would weaken their rival and make conquest easier. This discovery turned what had seemed like a domestic political plot into a case of actual treason with foreign enemies. Marcus found himself thrust into a position of great responsibility. The king appointed him as chief investigator, giving him authority to question anyone in the kingdom and access to all royal records. Some nobles who had supported the false charges against Elena now found themselves under investigation, worried about their own involvement in the conspiracy. Elena used her restored position to begin healing the divisions the conspiracy had created. She visited every family whose members had been forced to testify against her, assuring them that she bore no grudge for their coerced actions. She provided financial assistance to those who had suffered for refusing to participate in the plot. Her grace and forgiveness in the face of such betrayal only increased the people's love for her. The princess also worked to strengthen the kingdom's defenses against future conspiracies. She proposed new laws requiring multiple independent sources for any accusations against members of the royal family. She established a council of trusted advisors from different backgrounds who could provide diverse perspectives on important decisions. Most importantly, she created better communication channels between the royal family and common people, so that truth could more easily reach the throne. Marcus discovered that his courage in speaking up had inspired others throughout the kingdom. Several people came forward with information about suspicious activities they had witnessed but been afraid to report. A culture of transparency and accountability began to replace the fear and secrecy that had allowed the conspiracy to flourish. The investigation also revealed some uncomfortable truths about the kingdom's governance. Lord Aldrich had been able to operate so freely because too much power had been concentrated in too few hands. The king realized he needed to reform the government structure to prevent future abuses of power. Elena supported these reforms, understanding that a stronger, more transparent system would protect not just the royal family, but all citizens. As the truth spread throughout the kingdom, public opinion shifted dramatically. Elena went from being seen as a traitor to being viewed as a victim and hero. Marcus was celebrated as the loyal guardian who had saved the kingdom from disaster. Songs were written about their story, and children played games reenacting the dramatic court scene where truth triumphed over lies. But perhaps most importantly, the experience had forged an unbreakable bond between Elena and Marcus. She had learned that true loyalty meant being willing to risk everything for the truth, while he had proven that honor and duty sometimes required standing alone against overwhelming opposition. The trials of Lord Aldrich and Prince Damien reached their climax on a crisp autumn morning. The Great Hall was packed beyond capacity, with people standing in the corridors and crowding around the windows outside. The kingdom had waited months to see justice served for the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed their beloved princess. Lord Aldrich entered the courtroom a broken man. His once proud bearing had crumbled under the weight of evidence against him. Documents proved his guilt beyond any doubt, forged letters in his possession, financial records showing payments to false witnesses, and correspondence with enemy agents. His final strategy was to beg for mercy, claiming his actions were motivated by misguided loyalty to the crown. Prince Damien maintained his arrogance until the end, even as the evidence mounted against him. He sat straight in his chair, glaring at Elena and Marcus as if they were the villains in his story. When called to defend himself, he delivered a rambling speech about how he deserved to rule because he had the strength to make difficult decisions. His words only convinced the court of his dangerous ambition. The most damning evidence came from the foreign agents who had been captured during the investigation. Under questioning, they revealed the full scope of the enemy kingdom's involvement. Prince Damien had promised to weaken the realm's defenses and provide strategic information once he became king. In exchange, he would receive continued financial support and military backing if needed to maintain power. Elena testified at both trials, speaking with quiet dignity about how the conspiracy had affected her and the kingdom. She didn't seek revenge, but rather focused on ensuring that justice was served, and that such betrayals could never happen again. Her testimony was powerful, because it came from someone who had faced death with grace and emerged stronger from the experience. Marcus also testified about his investigation and the evidence he had uncovered. The court listened intently as he described finding the hidden letters, tracking down the real truth behind the false witnesses, and piecing together the conspiracy's timeline. His methodical presentation of facts left no room for doubt about the defendant's guilt. The verdicts were unanimous and swift. Lord Aldrich was found guilty of treason, conspiracy against the crown, falsifying evidence, bribing witnesses, and collaboration with foreign enemies. Prince Damien received the same convictions, with the additional charge of attempting to usurp the throne. Both men faced the death penalty under the kingdom's laws, though they were given the opportunity to make final appeals. King Roderick struggled with the sentences, despite the overwhelming evidence of guilt. Lord Aldrich had served the crown for many years before his betrayal, and Prince Damien was still family, however treacherous. The king spent days in private consultation with Elena, Marcus, and his most trusted advisors, weighing justice against mercy. Elena surprised many by advocating for commuting the death sentences to life imprisonment. She argued that executing the conspirators would make them martyrs to other ambitious nobles and might inspire future plots. More importantly, she believed that showing mercy would demonstrate the kingdom's strength and moral superiority over those who had tried to destroy it. Marcus initially disagreed with Elena's position, believing that such serious crimes deserved the ultimate punishment. However, after long discussions with the princess, he came to understand her reasoning. The kingdom had been wounded by betrayal and lies. Healing required demonstrating the values of justice and compassion that made their realm worth defending. The final sentencing drew enormous crowds to the Great Hall. King Roderick announced that both Lord Aldrich and Prince Damien would spend the rest of their lives in the kingdom's most secure prison, never to be released or pardoned. Their titles, lands, and wealth were stripped away, with their assets distributed to those who had suffered because of their conspiracy. Additionally, the king announced sweeping reforms to prevent future conspiracies. A new court system was established with multiple judges required for any case involving members of the royal family. Independent investigators chosen by lottery from qualified candidates would handle sensitive cases to prevent corruption. Most importantly, any citizen who uncovered evidence of treason would be rewarded and protected, encouraging people to speak up when they witnessed wrongdoing. Elena played a central role in implementing these reforms. Working closely with Marcus and other trusted advisors, she established regular meetings with representatives from all social classes, ensuring that the royal family stayed connected with their subjects' concerns and experiences. These sessions helped prevent the isolation that had made the conspiracy possible in the first place. The princess also created a new position within the royal guard, the truth keeper, whose sole responsibility was to investigate any accusations against the royal family independently. Marcus was offered this position, but he declined, preferring to remain as Elena's personal protector. Instead, he helped train the first truth keeper, passing on the investigative skills he had developed during the conspiracy. The kingdom's relationship with its neighbors also changed dramatically after the conspiracy's foreign connections were revealed. King Roderick expelled all diplomatic representatives from the enemy kingdom and imposed strict trade sanctions. Other neighboring realms, shocked by the extent of the foreign interference, offered their support and established new treaties to protect against similar plots. Elena's popularity reached new heights throughout the kingdom. People saw her not just as a royal who had survived a terrible ordeal, but as someone who had responded to betrayal with wisdom and mercy. Her decision to spare the conspirators' lives, while controversial among some who wanted harsher justice, ultimately proved popular with subjects who admired her compassion. The princess used her increased influence to advance causes she had always championed quietly. New hospitals were built in poor districts, schools were established in rural areas, and laws were passed to protect workers from exploitation. Elena's near-death experience had taught her that life was precious and that those in power had a responsibility to use their positions to help others. Marcus found his own life transformed by the events. No longer just a guard captain, he had become one of the kingdom's most trusted and respected figures. Noble families sought his advice on security matters, and the king relied on his judgment for important decisions. Yet Marcus remained humble, never forgetting that his greatest achievement was simply doing his duty when it mattered most. The foreign kingdom that had backed the conspiracy faced severe consequences for their interference. Other realms imposed economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation, effectively cutting them off from regional trade and alliances. Their attempt to weaken a neighbor through internal strife had backfired spectacularly, leaving them weaker and more isolated than before. As the months passed, the scars left by the conspiracy began to heal. The kingdom's institutions, strengthened by Elena's reforms, proved more resilient and trustworthy. Citizens felt more confident in their government's ability to protect them from both external threats and internal corruption. The culture of secrecy and fear that had enabled the conspiracy was replaced by openness and accountability. Elena and Marcus continued working together closely, their partnership now recognized as one of the kingdom's greatest strengths. The princess valued his unwavering loyalty and practical wisdom, while he respected her intelligence and moral courage. Together they represented the best of what the kingdom could be: honorable, strong, and committed to truth and justice. The story of the conspiracy became a cautionary tale told throughout the realm and beyond. It served as a reminder that even the most carefully planned deceptions could be unraveled by courage and dedication to truth. More importantly, it demonstrated that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty was the willingness to stand alone and speak up when everyone else remained silent. 5 years had passed since the conspiracy that nearly destroyed Princess Elena and the kingdom she loved. The great hall where she had once stood accused now hosted celebrations and ceremonies that brought joy instead of fear. Today was particularly special. The kingdom was celebrating the 5th anniversary of what had become known as Truth Day, commemorating the moment when justice prevailed over deception. Elena, now crown princess and her father's official heir, stood before the assembled crowd with confidence and grace. The experience of facing false accusations and near death had transformed her into an even stronger leader. She spoke to the people about the importance of courage, truth, and never giving up hope even in the darkest moments. Marcus stood at her side, no longer just her guard but now her closest advisor and friend. The king had elevated him to Lord Marshal, making him responsible for the security of the entire kingdom. Despite his new titles and responsibilities, Marcus still personally oversaw Elena's protection, a duty he considered sacred after everything they had survived together. The reforms Elena had championed had transformed the kingdom into a model of good governance that other realms sought to emulate. The Truthkeeper position had prevented 3 separate conspiracy attempts in the past 5 years, catching plots before they could develop into serious threats. The regular meetings between the royal family and citizens had created unprecedented trust between rulers and subjects. During the ceremony, Elena announced a new initiative that surprised even Marcus. She had decided to establish an academy for future leaders, where young people from all social classes could learn about governance, justice, and ethical leadership. The curriculum would include detailed study of the conspiracy against her, ensuring that future leaders understood the warning signs of corruption and betrayal. "We must never forget the lessons learned from our darkest hour," Elena told the crowd. "Truth is not always easy to find and justice is not always convenient to pursue. But a kingdom that abandons either truth or justice will ultimately fall to those who use lies and corruption as weapons." The ceremony also honored those who had shown courage during the conspiracy. The servants who had eventually told the truth about being forced to lie received recognition and rewards. The young scullery maid who had first admitted to being threatened by Lord Aldrich was now head of household staff, her bravery having earned her respect and advancement. Marcus was invited to address the crowd about his decision to investigate the conspiracy and speak up in court. He kept his remarks brief and focused on duty rather than personal heroics. "Every person in this kingdom has a responsibility to speak truth and protect the innocent," he said. "Titles and positions don't make someone brave. Courage comes from choosing to do what's right even when it's dangerous." The celebration included a moment of silence for those who had died because of the conspiracy. Several servants who had refused to participate in the false testimony had been quietly murdered by the conspirators to prevent them from revealing the truth. Their sacrifice was remembered alongside the triumph of justice, ensuring that the full cost of the conspiracy was never forgotten. Elena used the anniversary to announce that Lord Aldrich and Prince Damien, still imprisoned after 5 years, had both died of natural causes in recent months. Neither man had ever shown remorse for their crimes, taking their bitterness and ambition to their graves. Elena expressed sadness that they had never found peace or redemption, but noted that their deaths closed the final chapter on the conspiracy. The foreign kingdom that had supported the conspiracy had undergone its own transformation. Economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation had eventually led to the overthrow of their government by their own people. The new rulers had sent ambassadors to apologize for their predecessors' interference and to request the restoration of normal relations. Elena had agreed, believing that forgiveness was necessary for regional stability. As the ceremony concluded, Elena and Marcus walked together through the castle gardens, where she had once been accused of meeting with foreign agents. Now those same gardens hosted children playing and families picnicking, symbolizing how the kingdom had healed from its wounds. The princess reflected on how different her life might have been if Marcus hadn't found the courage to investigate and speak up. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't discovered the truth?" Elena asked as they paused beside a fountain. Marcus considered the question seriously before answering. "I try not to think about it too much, Your Highness. What matters is that truth did prevail, and the kingdom is stronger because of what we endured together." Elena smiled at his practical response, so typical of the man who had saved her life and helped rebuild the kingdom. "I've been thinking about the future, Marcus. Father is getting older, and someday I'll need to rule in my own right. I want you to promise me something. Anything, Your Highness. Promise me that if I ever start making the kind of mistakes that led to the conspiracy, If I ever become blind to threats or too trusting of the wrong people, you'll have the courage to speak up again, even if it means standing against me." Marcus looked at her with surprise, then understanding. The princess, who had once needed protection from false accusations, was now wise enough to ask for protection from her own potential mistakes. It was perhaps the greatest sign of how much she had learned from her ordeal. "I promise, Your Highness," Marcus said solemnly, "but I have faith that won't be necessary. The woman who showed mercy to her would-be murderers and used her suffering to make the kingdom better for everyone, that woman will never become the kind of ruler who needs to fear the truth." As they walked back toward the castle, Elena felt the deep satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. The conspiracy that had nearly destroyed her had instead become the foundation for creating a stronger, more just kingdom. And she knew that with Marcus at her side, dedicated to truth and justice above all else, that kingdom would continue to flourish for generations to come. The sun set behind the castle walls, casting long shadows across the gardens where truth had once been twisted into lies, but where honesty and courage had ultimately prevailed. It was a fitting end to a day celebrating the power of standing up for what's right, even when the whole world seems arrayed against you.